move into JavaScript, let's take a quick trip down memory lane and talk a little bit about Ruby. All right? This is a very complicated Ruby program, but I think you're all very bright and can very quickly figure out what this is doing. So let's take a look at the terminal. Cool. Great. How do I run a Ruby file? Yeah, Ruby and then the file name, right? So here it's just called scope. And all I have here is just a variable called name. Oh, Chris and Mike, or let's just put and Brooke. Cool. And then it's just a method that has say name, and all it does is it puts or prints to the screen the variable name. Who says that this will work? Who says this won't work? Okay, all right, interesting. Let's take a look. Great. What happened? There we go. We never invoke the function, right? So, who says this will work? Cool. Who says we need these? They both work. You're just used to that Ruby syntactical sugar. So I will leave this alone. Cool. Undefined local variable or name for the method name. Cool. Why? It's because we have to pass in the name here into the method call so that it has access to it. So now, oh right, sorry. Now I need this, right? Now I need name. This could be anything. This is just like args, right? Or some placeholder. Cool. And then I have to change this. I don't want, let's just do this. Args, cool. What I don't want is name everywhere and confuse you. Cool. Great. Great. And there it is. Oh, Sebastian and Brooke. Cool. So the way Ruby handles scope is that it must be passed in. Right? These methods don't organically have access to anything that's defined outside. Now, we can, in fact, use these global variables, right, which is like totally dirty. And then I can just put name here, $ name as a global variable, and I should be able to invoke this function just like that, because the global variable allows this variable to be accessible everywhere. Did I lose anybody? All caps just means that like it's a constant, but the $ indicates that it's a global variable. Cool. So, over that. And it should run just fine. Cool. So, that's Ruby land and how Ruby handles scope. Pretty familiar. Let us see how JavaScript handles scope. Here I have a const shirt, so like just like name, and it says it's shaped like a T, which is why it's called t-shirt. Cool. So we have a function called print shirt, and all it does is it's going to log shirt. Notice how I do not have to pass in anything here. And then all I'm going to do is invoke shirt. Who thinks this is going to work? Who thinks it will not? Cool. Let's take a look. How would I test my code? Not exactly. So all this JavaScript, it runs in the browser. So I will have to, yeah, I'm just going to use the browser console. Cool. So here we go. Cool. And there it is. There's the log. Shaped like a T, which is why it's called a t-shirt. Why did this work? And it did not work in Ruby. Right. So just to be clear, because there was a couple of different answers there. All right. I simply defined a variable, and this variable is available globally. So it's a little bit different in the way that JavaScript handles. So when we say global variables, we are saying that it's defined against essentially what is nothing being nested. Right. This is not being defined in anything except what I would describe as like against the ruler, so to speak. It's not inside of a function. Unless I did something like this, where this shirt is being defined inside this function. Does that make sense? So if it's not being nested or wrapped or anything, it is available on the global scope. So if, however, I have a shirt here, and then I create a new variable called shirt, and I console log that shirt, and I run this, what should I expect to console log? New shirt. Cool? So one last thing is I can define another variable inside here. Can I console log pants? Will pants exist outside of this function? No, right? These rules apply in the same way that Ruby does, and that is this function has its own scope. And so outside of this function scope, pants should not exist. And so let's test that. So right here on line 11, it does not exist. Right? And so here, JavaScript defines its scopes as such. It's called lexical scoping. So what I will do is I'll just explain this to you. So I'm going to give you like the actual definition and then just like an interesting way to think about it. So the word lexical refers to the fact that lexical scoping uses the location where the variable is declared, which makes sense, right? When I defined this shirt outside on the global, it was available globally. When I defined this shirt inside the function, it was only available inside the function. If I console log shirt out here, what do you think it will be? Is it going to be this one or this one? Is it going to be new shirt or the sentence? It should be the sentence, right? Because, again, the shirt that's in this context, as it's defined here, is only available within the scope of the function. Yes, sir. It's probably not.
Comment out the constant shirt in the function.
Yeah.
And then you move the other constant shirt below the function.
Below the function?
Yeah. And then you call console log shirt in the function. Does it still know that that global variable exists?
We will get into that in a second, but to answer your question, I'll show you. Cool. Sorry, it's logging this one. You want to know if this runs, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. It will not run this way. We'll get into that here in a second. Cool. For those that kind of figure that out, right? So the lexical refers to the fact that where the variable, the location of where the variable is declared within the source code will determine where the variable is available. So nested functions have access to variables declared in their outer scope. All that means is inside this function, right? Or even if I had a function inside this function, it will have access to everything that's declared outside of it. Cool. The way I think about lexical scoping is, what does the word lexical kind of have roots in? Latin, right? So, I mean, I didn't mean to say right, like everyone kind of knew that, but lexical is rooted in Latin, and really just, it means word. So if I say lexical environment, I'm saying just the word environment. What is the word environment for your code? So where are things written? And where do they have access to them? Is what you think about lexical scoping. Cool? So where I define shirt, how I defined it, how often I've defined it, determines where I have access to it and which one I have access to. That's all. That's just sort of like the abstract theory. Are there any questions so far? Pretty simple. I have a variable named John. I can just run a function called sayName. All it does is it console logs name. So when I execute say name, this name is going to be John, and it's going to pull right into here. It's a little different from Ruby. All right? Cool. Here's the same thing. I can define a variable named Gary. This is not fun. I can define a variable named Gary, log it, and when I execute say name, it will return to me the variable name. However, if I try to console log name outside the lexical scope of this function, name was never defined outside, and so I do not have access to name. Pretty straightforward? Great. When I run the function sayName, a new name is declared inside the lexical scope of function. And so when I console log name, it looks inside the function first, and then it will look outside that function. Cool. Great. So there are three types of scope within JavaScript. The first one is global, the second is function, and the last one is block. I'm going to go into all three of them. The global, a variable that's declared on the global scope is basically outside of any function, outside of any block, outside of any object. It is literally on right here, nested inside nothing. That means that it is global. It's available everywhere within your application. Are there any questions on specifically this file? But if you load this JavaScript right, inside your HTML, let's take a look at where it's being loaded. The script tag is being loaded at the end. And so everything after this script tag will have access to this index.js.
But index.js doesn't have access to things after it?
No. Good question. It works very much like CSS. Cool. Great. So the reason I'm trying to kind of go off this README is because a lot of these are definitions. So I want you to be able to go back and literally possibly listen to the lecture again or look at the README. Like, I remember Evans explaining this exact thing, and so hopefully that's more helpful. All right? It's different from like mods 1 and 2. I'm just kind of showing you about what it can do. Here in the beginning of mod 3, I'm just defining a lot of things so you can understand how JavaScript is running. Cool? So, any questions on the global scope? Great. So the functional scope, right? We talked a little bit about that. I cannot and do not have access to name outside of the function. Any variables that are declared inside the function are available to anything within that function, to include nested functions. So, function scope. Variables are confined to the function in which they are declared. It's really straightforward. Are there any questions on functional scoping? You can, yeah. Do you want me to pause it? Pause?
No, I just didn't want to like run out and then oh my god.
All right, everybody just wait. I'm just going to pause the recording. I'm not going to pause it. I'm not going to pause it. Let's just keep going. All right, so the last thing is block scoping. Cool. And that basically concludes the lecture. We're done. All right, I hope you guys learned everything. So the last one's block scoping, right? Thanks for playing along. You guys are a fun bunch. Nailed it. So here's the weird thing. You might have seen a block before in Ruby, right? Let's take a look at where we might have seen a block. So do you remember, actually, I have a Ruby file. You can have an array, and boop, boop. And then you can do .each. And what does .each do? Right? I have a do and an end. Right? Who has heard that these are called the do block? Right? You've heard this phrasing before, but what is this? What else can I pass in? These brackets. For every single thing, the first thing is going to take this like number, right? And what this number is going to refer to is each one of these individual elements as it's going through each. And then I can just do the number plus equals to 1, something like that. Right? And this right here is a block of code. It's just some piece of code that's defined between two curly braces. Are there any questions on a block? Pretty straightforward. Thanks. I'm checking in because it's just my habit. I just want to make sure you get it. This is a block, right? In the same way, it's just two curly boys. You have some variable and assigning that variable. The problem is, if I were to try to log, right, I have an uncaught reference error. Block var is not defined because it is only available inside the block. If, however, I were to do something like this, why does it highlight both? That's weird. Cool. And I were to try to console log the block variable. Inside the block, there's access to this. But outside the block, because the block doesn't have like a variable assigned to it, there's no like const this block, this malloc, right? This block equals to, and then a block of code. I can't ever reference this anywhere. Does that make sense? I can't use this anywhere. So blocks are tricky, but where else have we seen blocks? Well, have you seen this before? Maybe if condition. Okay, there we go. Right? So inside block. This right here is that block of code. That's where you've seen it before. Is that looking a little familiar? Cool. So blocks are not this like nebulous thing that you have never seen or never worked with before, but you'll never see them just defined alone out of nowhere, like a wild block in your code. Cool. So they are separate block scoping, and that's the basic rules of global block and function scoping. It's not that hard right now, but I'm going to add a bunch of layers to it. So I just want to make sure that, like, hey, is that pretty clear? Okay. So in the same way that, look, I cannot access hog's name even though this condition is sort of true. So I can have pigs, can fly is true. If pigs.canFly should return, this should return true. So this if statement should run. I will define something in this block. You would assume or imagine that this should be available now because I defined it, but when I run hog's name, it is not defined. It is only available inside the block. And then once the block executes and finishes, everything inside is gone. Cool? All right. Here, any questions on var, let, and const right off the bat? You understand var, let, and const? Cool, let's go over it. I'm gonna move a little quickly. And so let's just take a look. Var is like the original, so you'll see a lot of things defined in var. In ES5, var is the only way to declare a variable. And so let's take a look. Cool. Here I have var, I don't know, anything? Powerful. Mike Chang. Huh? The go-to? Right, the go-to. Right, cool. I can do var Mike Chang as the go-to. Then I can do Mike Chang equals to the greatest of all time. And I can reassign it anytime I want. I can even do var Mike Chang equals to reassigned. So if I look at Mike Chang again, it's reassigned. It's interesting. Yes, sir.
It seemed very clear in the readmes over the weekend to just never use var anymore. Is there any reason with let and const that you really ever use var?
Yes, there are small reasons to use var. You will see me constantly harp on the importance of const and let. And there's interesting things that happen in JavaScript that var does for you. So if you want those things to happen very specifically, then var is the way to go. And I will explain here in the difference. Cool? So what is this right here? What if I did var Brook? Bloop, and just finished it. We did that earlier, right? What is the value of Brooke besides being the most amazing human being at Fire School? In this app, undefined, right? So we have Brooke. It's currently undefined in this application. Cool. What is this doing? Just var variable name. I'm declaring it. I'm declaring that, hey, I want to block aside some place in memory for this variable name. It does not have a value, in which case I will have to assign it a variable. So just this first half is known as declaration, and this second half is known as assignment. Are there any questions on declaring and assigning and the differences? Awesome. So let's take a look at some of these examples, right? Var donut, and then I can reassign the value, and I can redeclare the same variable. So var, you can just willy-nilly redeclare your variable. Can you possibly see some problems that might happen? Right? You totally do by accident. And did you see an error come up? No, it'll just be like, oh, is that what you want to do? Cool. And it'll just fly silently. Is there a major difference? Memory space. Because it will reassign it a different piece of memory at that different value, you will only ever have access to now the new redeclared. So in terms of like really deep into CS, you're just going to waste a lot of memory. Cool. Unless you have like millions of these, it's not going to really slow your app down. But it's just to answer your question. var is not block scoped. Not block scoped. What does that mean? You can access outside the block. Cool? Let's take a look at this. var x equals to 1. Inside my block, I have reassigned and redeclared var of x. If I log it, I get 2. Can you imagine how that might be a problem? Right? I should, in this block, keep that x and this x completely separate. There are very rare use cases where I will want to mutate and change the original variable after a particular block or a function, in which case I would want to use var. It makes your code a little bit unreadable if you don't comment it very well, but this is a feature of var, and if you're using it and doing it on purpose, those might be the very rare use cases for var in the modern JavaScript today. Cool? Any questions so far on not block scoped and why var is not block scoped? Great, let's move on. Let is interesting. Cool, let's do this. We can have let your boy equals 2. All right, chef, it's your boy RD. Nobody laughed. This is gonna be a long 3 weeks for me. Cool. Can I do your boy? And now it's going to be, what was me? Can I do that? So what is your boy now? These Chrome dev tools are too good. Right? I have reassigned the value of the variable your boy. If I were to do let your boy equals 2, can I though? Well, what do you think will happen? All right. Your boy has already been declared. So let, the keyword let, you can only declare one time, but you can reassign as many times as you want, cannot be redeclared. If you were to read this sentence later, will this make sense to you by a show of hands? Yeah? That's important. Cool? All right, good deal. Let is block scoped, right? It is block scoped. So let x equals to 1. Because I am inside this block, God bless you, I can use let x again. because this let x and this let x are different because of scoping, lexical scoping. Once I leave the block, this let x goes away. Only this let x exists. And so when I constant log x, I should log 1.
But if you call console log, you block on X.
It would be 2. If I called constant log inside the block on x, it would be 2 inside the block, correct? So let is block scoped. Do you see the difference between block scoped and not block scoped? Check. Awesome. Great. Here, const. Let's take a look. Great. I have const. All right. What do we want? Chrome boy. Chrome boy equals 2. TM. Powerful. What the? Oh, I just put M. Chrome boy is like that instructor Andrew that you may or may not have seen just passing by. He used to always say like TM. Like, oh, that's the move. TM, like trademark. Cool. Great. Can I do Chrome boy and reassign it to you're the best around? Assignment to a constant variable. I cannot reassign a const. Can I redeclare it though? Yes or no? No? Chromeboy has already been declared. It is a constant. It cannot be redeclared or reassigned. Does that make sense? Cool. So here's a new thing. Just like I did var money, and I just set aside some memory space where I will assign the value to money later. If I do const Mooney, it will tell me I am missing the initializer in const declaration. What that means is I cannot just have this variable with const laying around, because what that means is if I ever want to, I would have to reassign it. Mooney. This with money must be declared and assigned at the same time. I cannot do this. Money did not exist, right? One more time. So const word. If I ask for word, it did not exist. So when you're using const, you have to declare and assign it at the same time. Are there any questions on var, let, and const? Cool. Is const block scoped?
Can let be assigned? Does let have to be assigned when it's declared?
No, because it could be reassigned as many times as it wants. So that's totally fine. Very good question. Is const block scoped? Totally. It is block scoped. Cool. See, and when I see, it will log 1 and not throw a syntax error. Cool. Even though I have two consts of the same thing, because in the block, it has a different lexical scope.
So does that mean that like your computer's created two different memory slots and they just happen to be called the same thing?
Yes, here there is a memory spot for this constant C. Inside this block, it is pointing to a different spot in memory for this const C that only exists inside the block.
If you assign that second block to a function and then call that function, which if it were a different initializing for it, I don't know what you would say.
You mean variable here?
No, const let and var are all. What category do const let and var fall into? What is that?
They're like,
What?
Identifiers?
Yes, they're identifiers, correct.
So if you use an identifier other than const, and that block with const equals 2 wanted a function, it would reassign it, right? But with const,
Let's
what would it do?
let's take a look at what you are saying, right? Since this seems like a very good question, right? So walk me through your code.
Okay, so if you let c equal 1,
Let or a const?
okay. I mean, I know what the first one does, I don't know what the second one does.
Which one's the second one?
The one with const.
Okay, const, right? You want const what?
Const c equals 1.
Const c equals to 1.
And then on the next line, function c equals 2.
C or const?
Const c equals 2.
Okay.
And then we call that function.
Do you want me to log it?
Log it within the function.
Do you want me to log it?
Sure.
Okay. I figured. Cool. All right.
And then we call that function. What does that do?
Sorry, I need to actually give this a name. All right. CB. Cool. Well, before I even get to this, all right, let's take a look at whether or not I may or may not have given this example already. Oh no, I did it earlier with the shirt. Here it is. Do you remember? It's okay. Just need the practice, right? Cool. So you want me to log C right now. All right, and I get 1. Now, if I were to invoke CB, I get 2. Because of function scope. Function has its own scope. Cool? Great question. I encourage them. And if you feel confident in that you know it, great, you learned. And if somebody else has a question and you're like, I have an idea, let's see how it plays out, because it might not be what you think. But if it is, then you've reinforced that you've learned. All right? So I love that, like, you asked and you weren't 100% sure. That's good. Just want to, like, keep, yeah, thumbs up. Party rock. Cool. Questions on varlet const, block scoping, function scoping, global scope. Awesome. All right, this is a lot of stuff here. Bloop. I know. You guys remember this guy, Chris Farley? Powerful. Cool. R.I.P. R.I.P. Rest in power. Great. There is a phenomenon called hoisting. All right. I'm sure you've read about this. Did you guys watch the video? The 3.5-hour video, yes. Okay. I just need to understand, because it will help formulate how I explain it. Who has, and don't be ashamed because it was like a 3.5-hour video, who has not watched it? All right.
Is there anybody that ever does it raise their hand?
Woo! We're in for a ride. No. Actually, to be honest, the last mod, like half of them watched it, but it's okay. No, I mean, you're here to learn. I mean, it's 3.5 hours, very intimidating. I get it. Cool. All right, so here is what hoisting is. Ready? And I have to write it in code, otherwise it will not work. Great. Ready? Boom, boom, boom. I talked about global. Talked about function scoping, block scoping. We talked about varlet const, right? Here's just examples of them so that I can have you look at them when you're going back through the code, because I know all of you obviously go back and look through the code and learn a lot. So, before I get to hoisting, actually, there's something else I want to talk about. What is missing here? I like where your head's at. Return is definitely missing, but I'm missing either. Yes. So if I do not put varlet or const, it automatically becomes what is known as a global variable. What that means is, here, I can do this. All right. Do I have access to driver? No. But if I invoke declare driver exists. Because when I invoke it, I am creating the global variable driver, and I'm assigning it a value. So this is function definition. Asking for driver, I invoke it where it will declare the variable driver for me on the global. then I have access to driver on the global. Yeah.
In the scope of the block, does it matter if it's a variable with let or const?
Yes.
What's the difference?
I'm glad you asked. Let us take a quick look back at the 3. So we have var let const, right? And here inside the block, vars x is 1, var x is 2. I have access to 2 here because var does not block scope.
Right, that I get. I'm just more curious the difference between let and const.
Let and const are both not both are block scoped, so there's no difference in the way that it leaves the block. Sorry about that. Thank you for clarifying. Perfect. Cool. Anything else before we move on to hoisting? Cool. All right. So hoisting. Interesting, right? In Ruby, can I, let's just leave this terrible global variable in there. Can I call say name before it is defined? Ruby reads, and so does JavaScript, top to bottom, left to right. It's going to go, great, declare this global variable, cool, blank, 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 blank. Hey, invoke say name, or there's a reference to a variable called say name, and then it will stop and break. It'll just go, wait, just kidding, there's nothing there, and it stops. It won't even go 7, 8, 9, and it was so close. It won't do it. It'll just be like, hey, I don't know what this is. Sorry. Try again next time. Thanks for playing. Cool? Are there different languages for different languages?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That was literally meant for everyone else to hear because you're sitting in the front, so people in the back can't hear. I'm just repeating the question.
Does everyone around the world code in English?
Yes. Powerful language. Yeah. Yeah. It's Marca. Yeah. There's no like. As far as I'm aware,
There's a language called call that's in Arabic. That's all.
okay.
There's no like French version of JavaScript.
There is, yes, that's what I mean to say, right? JavaScript is written in English, Python is written in English, C, Java, C#, Objective-C, C++, English. America. And every other country that speaks it, cool? So, did that answer your question, or? Yeah, so thank you for help. This class is powerful. So, nailed it. Brilliant. So it will stop right here, right? It does not understand, but in JavaScript, however, right? Let's talk about hoisting. Cool. Let's look at this. Let's take a look right here at this. Boop. Any questions so far on what we think is happening right here? 108 and 110. Who can tell me what will happen on line 108 and 110?
You declare your and assigning a variable in 108, and then you just console the logging of that variable.
100% perfect answer. Thank you for using the correct terminology, right? I'm going to do that too. I'm going to like harp on you to use the correct terminology because you need to practice with it when you're in your technical interviews and you're like, oh, you're making a variable right there and then you're doing this with it. I'm like, great. It would be a better and more impressive answer if you said that you were declaring and assigning a variable to this value and then you are invoking a function with that variable, right? Or you're console logging with that variable. So small little tweaks here. Please don't be afraid. It 100% is better to do it here than on a technical interview and not get a job, right? Just like thinking through. So, great. If I were to refresh, I should see 78. Oh, sorry. This is just a comment. Cool. Oh, this is an error. Can't do that. Okay. These are all the errors that you can't do. Cool. I can't reassign Apple. All right. We're done here. Cool. Great. Did everyone see those errors as I went through them? It was basically all the stuff that I told you let and const don't like, right? And that is either redeclaring or reassigning on a const or redeclaring the let. So far, so good? What I just said and what I just did? It was kind of fast. All right. So, that's all. What do you think will happen on line 106 if I try to log happy before I declare this variable? Will it? Who says it'll still work? Who says it will not work? For those that say it will work, what will I see? Cowboy Bob over here? Absolutely not. Undefined. Undefined. So I'm going to explain this lengthy process of how JavaScript works under the hood, and then I will give you a 5-minute break to process and digest it. What happens is JavaScript runs your code 2 times. The first thing it does is it reads every single character, line for line, top to bottom, left to right, character for character. And so what it does is it goes L, E, T, space. Because of this space, preceding it was LET, it understands that there is a keyword let. Then it does PEARS space, and it understands because of this space right here, there's some sort of variable that I'm attaching to let. Because I see an equal assignment operator, anything after this will be the value I want to assign to pairs using the keyword let, in which case I will do all of this. And then when I finally see this line break, I know that the assignment is over. Does that make sense? It will do that for everything in your code.
Is the assignment over when you hit the line break or when you hit the last quote? Because it's a string.
Well, it's when I hit the line break, because if I do this, it'll break on me. It'll still think that, I'll show you.
That it's actually trying to run this part of the assignment.
What the? Huh. That should have broke. Weird. Oh, it's the automatic semicolon insertion. Oh, I didn't save it. There it is. We don't put semicolons in our code anymore because JavaScript in modern browsers, and the way it runs at runtime, will automatically insert these semicolons for you. Back in the day, you had to put the semicolons or your code will break. Who has written CSS before? Right? If you do not put the semicolon, what happens? It does not take. Cool? JavaScript is very nice, and it assumed that there was more to it. I actually finished this statement, and then it's like, what is SDFASD? And it's like, I don't know what this is. Uncaught reference error. Cool? So, first, it reads through all of your code. The first time it executes, it reads through everything. So, what this is doing is it says, great, there is a console log of a variable called happy in the first run through. It is not actually executing. It is going to read through and put aside in memory everything it needs to put aside in memory. It will say, oh, var happy, var, specifically and only var, it will see that, oh, it's keyword var, happy. Can I reassign and redeclare var? Does it make sense at line 108 to be as efficient as possible to also save and store into memory what I'm going to assign it? Absolutely not, because what if I did this, right? What if I did this, and then this, and then this? It does not make sense to save the value if I know I can assign and redeclare multiple times. It makes sense to be like, great, I'm simply going to block off memory for this var happy, I see you, and I'm not going to save the value of it yet. And then I'm going to read through the rest of your code. The second time I run, I'm going to go, great, top to bottom, left to right, and then I'm going to come across this console log where I'm in the actual execution phase, where I can console log happy. Does happy exist in the second run through on the execution phase? Yes. I, on the first run through, saw a var happy, and again, did not save the assigned value. I simply said, great, var happy, that exists. I don't have a value for it. So if I have a var happy and exists and I do not have a value for it, what do I give it? Undefined. On line 108, on the second run through, it will see, great, I'm in actual execution mode. I'm going to store this value to happy, so when I log it the second time, happy has an appropriate value. So one more time, I'm going to see undefined from line 106, and then happy gets its value, and then when I console log again, I get Cowboy Bob. So JavaScript will run through your code 2 times. The first time is to store everything in memory, read through everything, make sure you have no syntax errors, your curly boys open and they close somewhere, otherwise what happens? Like, it has no idea. It needs to open and then close and be like, okay, cool. It will read through, store everything in memory, make sure you have no syntax errors, and then read through your code again, top to bottom, and then execute it. Are there questions on how JavaScript, the runtime, will execute your JavaScript, and what I mean by there's 2 phases to the execution of your JavaScript code? Yes?
Sounds like you're implying that if you wrote const happy equals Cowboy Bob, that it would be defined in both those cases.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm just focusing on var right now, but I like where your head's at. Cool? So, what this is really saying is, it almost looks like on the first read-through, JavaScript's going to go, great, and then take this. It looks like this. It does not do it. It puts it in memory, puts it available at the top. And then when you get here, it actually will do, I lost Cowboy Bob. Then it will actually assign it. That is why it was named hoisting. Because on the first read through, it takes this, places it into memory, does not take the assigned value on the right. And so the second time it runs through, var is there, but it is hoisted undefined, right? That's why when someone asks you, or you hear a definition like, can you explain hoisting? And the second I hear someone say, oh, it moves your code up, I'm like, this interview is over. Thanks for playing. You're good. Thank you. Because it does not move your code at all. It's just that JavaScript runs through your code 2 times. The first time to read through, the second time to execute. Because everything is now in memory. Because it will solve this problem here. I will be able to invoke it even if I'm invoking it after I've defined it. Now that you know that, does Ruby do that? No, it does not. So the languages run and execute differently. Cool? This hoisting takes a long time. Declarations are not physically moved to the top. They are not. So var hoists. Var hoists. Who wants a break? Okay, great. Let's take a 5-minute break. Great. As a reminder, the code is not actually moved up. It simply runs through the first time, defines and saves into memory all the variables, and then on the second runtime, it will execute your code. So var will do that, var hoists, right? And I believe somebody kind of alluded to it. Let's take a look at what happens here. So what I should see is on 115, a log of sharks. So far, so good. Threat to the internet. Do you remember when I was like joking about that and told you? If I were to log on 112 sharks, knowing that let does not hoist, I can expect to see that this was not defined. Cool? I did let sharks equals to, and it breaks on 112 because let and const do not hoist. Are there any questions on that? Great. However, let's take a look at this. Who thinks this will run? In the same exact way, side by side, we had invocation, then definition. Invocation, then function, definition. What do you think? Hoist or no hoist? Okay. It will, in fact, execute. Function keyword hoists. Function keyword hoists. Function keyword hoists. Now, if you remember, I told you that you can, in fact, assign a variable to a function. Do you remember that? Var, hoist or doesn't hoist? Cool. So, if var is here, what do you think happens to anything after this equal sign? Current mood. All right? Let's make this clearer. Right. This is what happened, right? On 119, I tried to invoke current mood. Remember, current mood, as it runs the first time through, is undefined. Can I invoke a function that is undefined? No. So when I did this, right, it was undefined. So remember, anything afterwards is undefined. If I change this to let, there's no way it's going to work because let and const do not hoist. All right, did I lose you? Cool. Let and const do not hoist. There is a difference between assigning a variable like this and then actually doing the function keyword. Function keyword, hoist or does not hoist? Cool, great. So smart. All right, we're gonna move forward from hoisting. All right, I don't want to talk about that forever.
Is hoisting an answer to some kind of like semantic?
This is the problem it solves.
But I mean, like, why does it exist? Why wouldn't programmers just forget about creating hoisting and just declare things in a logical order? Like, is hoisting a solution to a problem that actually makes sense to have?
You will start to see, believe it or not, sorry, I was about to say something really snarky, but I'm gonna rephrase it. Apps can get very, very long, like this, right? I only have 200 lines here. It probably took me a couple hours to write all this. Imagine you worked full-time, 40 hours a week on an app. Can you imagine that it might be 2, 3, 4, 5,000 lines long? Do you want to deal with finding where you've declared it and going, wait, I'm calling it here, so I'll have to put it all the way here just to make sure it's there, and then I can run it? That becomes annoying. And so that's sort of the issue that it solves. Right. I mean, it's so easy to see it here, but then when you bury it in thousands of lines of code, you don't want to try to look for where you invoke it. You want to just be like, look, I'm going to define it here, and I want it available to me at runtime. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me ask you this. Will you be the only person to write that code? Okay. Have you heard of something called pair programming? Okay. What winds up happening, sorry, it's my snark coming out. What winds up happening is you get in teams of 4 or 5 that work on another team of 4 and 5, all pushing to the same code base. So if Sebastian were to write some code, and then Brooke were to write some code, and then I were to see it, pull their changes, do I want to take the time to look through where they've defined it to make sure that I can execute at the right time and take time to figure out where I'm going to write something because they decided to write it somewhere else in a different file. It becomes very painful, right? So, yeah, I mean, it solves that problem. Cool. And you will see, and I will show you later on this week where we refactored code. Me and the great and powerful Mike Chang took 2 hours to basically do a lab. And we wrote it what it would sort of look like in production and kind of like how that core organization looks like. And I'll show you that on Thursday. Cool? Awesome. So, first class functions. We only have 12 minutes left. So I'm going to move pretty quick. But let me know if you have questions, all right? A programming language is said to have first class functions when the functions are treated like any other variable. So what does that mean? Does anyone have any idea? Do you remember when I did this? Great, I have a function here. I can simply do const fun function, and I can have it equal to either a named function, not really, but an anonymous function. And now I have access to it. So if I were to say, what is fun function? It's a variable that points to the reference of that function because objects, and functions are a special type of object, are passed by reference, not by value. Starting to make sense? So as I use these keywords constantly. Cool. So JavaScript is a first-class programming language because I can, in fact, store functions in variables. In Ruby, have you seen something like this? Ready? Some variable equals to def method, right? And then like end. That just looks crazy to me. You've never assigned a variable to some method you've defined, right? And then like puts Coolio, right? Like nothing. This does not work. So Ruby is not considered a first-class programming language. Or is there any questions on first-class programming language, just the definition of what that means? Right? I can just have functions be variables, right? Var eat food is a function, and then I can invoke this variable because it returns a reference to that function. And it will do exactly what I'm telling it. The next thing is, right, I can do, yeah, okay. Functions declared with the function keyword. What happens here? Is this okay? Legal or illegal? Right. When I use the var, I can override it, be another function, and then when I invoke it, I've overwritten it. Cool? So functions with var can be reassigned and redeclared at any time. Cool? Great. Be careful when you do this because you can overwrite your functions. That's why it is good practice in most cases to use like a const as a variable for a function so that you cannot overwrite it. They will throw errors if you attempt to overwrite a function that you've declared and assigned it a const as a variable, as the identifier. Any questions on why we would want to do this? Can someone tell me why I'd want to do this?
It's kind of like extra security for your function.
Yeah, I don't want to accidentally overwrite it, right? Like a Folio. Cool. Great. Let's talk about callbacks. A callback is a function that is passed into another function as an argument. In Ruby, what we've done is, if we have a method, like another method, and all it does is puts Coolio, I can, instead of passing it in here as another method, I can simply invoke it inside the function, right? I can invoke this function inside this function. Yes? Check? Cool. Now, in JavaScript, we can in fact pass functions as arguments. So if I have a function called log callback, it takes in a callback function, or it takes in any argument. Any argument, this is just a placeholder. I can pass in a reference to this function so that when return thinker is passed in as an argument, inside here, the argument is going to be return thinker. So I'm going to log the invocation of the callback function, which is going to be return thinker. One more time, a little bit faster. Function, function. This takes in another function. So when I invoke it with the bananas, I'm passing in an argument. The argument I'm passing in is a reference. Notice how there's no bananas here on this function. It is a reference. And then return thinker gets passed in, and then it's going to log the invocation of return thinker. So callbacks is just functions calling other functions. That's it. Functions calling other functions. Cool? Callbacks. Functions calling other functions. This function will make a call back to another function, whatever was passed in as an argument. Thumbs up. Thumbs down. Cool. All right. Functions can return other functions. Yeah, you guys like that? So this function right here can return a value, a reference to another function. So here's something I want to explain. I have outer function, right? That's just the reference. I did not put the banana, so I did not invoke it. When I invoke outer function, what do I get? What is the return value of outer function? It is going to be whatever this is, the return. And the return is another function. So if I invoke outer function, I get the inner function. I get the inner function. And the inner function, I can invoke as well. If I get a reference to that inner function, I can simply invoke that inner function. Haha, I am your inner function, lols, right? Any questions on functions returning other functions? If a, yeah.
When you have the sort of two sets of bananas, can you kind of treat it like an array? Like if you have multiple inner functions, can you navigate? Say I have a big function and I have 4 inner functions.
Yeah.
I want to call the last one specifically. Could I navigate to it?
Yeah.
Like an array?
You can. Yeah, because remember, functions are just objects. So if I had an array, I can have outer function right in it. So const array 1. So if I look at array 1, it's an array of one function. So if I go array at an index of 0, gives me that first object, right? And that's just a function, which I can then invoke, which returns the inner function of that, which I can then invoke. JavaScript's wacky. But if you understand the language, this just makes sense.
So if you did return ha ha ha, you wouldn't get second banana.
If I did return ha ha ha.
In the inner function.
Oh yeah. I would still need to invoke it though. Because remember, when I invoke this outer function, it returns the inner function, which is just a reference, which I must then also invoke. What if these had arguments? I would put them inside the bananas if they needed arguments. Cool? So if a function, right, returns a function as a result, it is a higher order function. If a function takes another function as an argument, it is a higher order function. The easiest way to think about this is in order to get to the other function, this one must run first. It has a higher priority. It must come first. It must be invoked first to get to the other one. So in the order of execution, this one is higher. And it's a higher order function. This is the first time you've kind of heard this. This is a mind-blowing term. So I don't have a lot of time with you right now, but what I need you to do is practice explaining what this means to each other after lecture. Explain in your own words a higher order function and just what that is. And then just write an example of one to your battle buddy. Cool? All right. Great. The last thing I'm talking about is called closure. And that is, I have a function here. So far, so good. I have a variable, trash, should be let or something, right? No? Nobody like that? Okay, cool. Thank you. And then I returned another function. We talked about lexical scoping. Does this function have access to cheese? Does this have access to cheese? It is defined lexically inside this function scope. So this function has access to every variable defined outside of it. So this variable is defined outside a function. Therefore, it has access to cheese. So in a closure, it is a function inside another function. This curly bracket encloses on this function.
If you use letter ones to define cheese with its spell.
Yeah, it should work.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, it should work.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay. Yeah, it should work, yeah.
What would happen if you had a number function also defined in closure on the same line as a return function, like say I like to eat like beef or something like that? Which one of those functions would it call when you have the double banana?
Whatever return calls. So, for example, right? Let's take a look at this. Cool. So, what you're saying is, I want another function in here, right?
Yeah.
Function, boom, 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 and it does nothing. Or as I like to say, no thing. Cool? Uh-oh. Huh. I don't know if you can actually squeeze these in. I don't know if you can define it like here without returning. Let's do this. Oh my god, I don't have a name for this function. That's why I'm so stupid. Cool. When I run closure, it's a reference to that function. If I were to invoke it, it will only return what is returned. So, I'm glad that you asked that, because this right here is known as what is described as a free variable inside the closure scope of this higher order function. This is a higher order function because it returns a function. This is a closure because I have a function inside another function. And I have this free variable which is being used inside this return function. If I have a variable being used inside this return function, this free variable is known as being captured. So cheese is a free variable that is being captured inside the closure scope of the function called closure, and closure is a higher order function. when I invoke closure here, I lose access to ever modifying cheese because it returns function. And cheese is forever stored inside this return value. So if I invoke it, it returns this function. If I double invoke it, this closure returns this function, which is then invoked, and it returns this sentence. Cool? In that way, when I did this, and I added that extra function in here, this is a free variable that is never captured and is lost forever. Cool? Does that make sense? Is that good? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Cool. All right, good deal. Yo, dog, I heard you like JavaScript, so I put callbacks in your callback so you can call back while you call back. Cool. Very good. This is a factory pattern, right, where I can have a function, return a function. This function takes in an argument, and it returns another function that also takes in an argument. So I can simply invoke multiply by n with 10. So now my outer number is what? 10, right? So when I return, what does this return? This, correct, absolutely. This returns a function. So multiply by 10 is what? A function that is looking for another variable. One more time. Multiply by n. Takes in an outer number. 10 is the outer number being invoked. It returns another function that's looking for an argument. So multiply by 10. Let's do that. Let's take a look. Cool. What is multiply by 10? It is a function that is looking for n as an argument that returns outer number times n. What is outer number? Outer number is 10 here because it got stored. It was captured. 10 was captured. So whatever I call multiply by 10 with, say, 3, I should get what? There you go. This class is smart. By simply having a function return other functions, I can create as many functions as I want, capturing the initial argument. So multiply by 5, if I put the outer number as 5, outer number will be 5 as it's stored here and invoked. Multiply by 2, outer number will be 2 times whatever number. So right? Remember, this is a lot of information. That's why I went slow, because you need to understand how it's working, and then you can scale up very quickly. Yes, remember, it's captured, right? Those free variables are captured. And there's just always memes. Cool? Are there any questions as scope, closure, and callback, var let const, function scope, block scope, global scope? Great, that's all I have for you today. Thanks so much.